So thank you for joining us. And for those of you who are joining us after the event, we missed you, but we're glad that you're tuning in now. Tonight, we are so lucky to be partnering with Ellen Trackman from Trackman Law Center. We have our own special, one of our my personal favorites. I hope no one else from Kindbody watches this. Dr. Skaznik Wikiel, who is our REI in Denver. For those of you who aren't aware, Denver is one of Kindbody's newest locations. We had our mobile pop-up there all summer. And we're going to have our full clinic that is opening soft launch in December, but big launch in January. So hope everyone who's here tonight can join us there. Tonight, we are going to be having a conversation about the surrogacy laws medically and legally in Colorado. Dr. Skaznik Wikiel is going to be talking to us about everything medically. She'll do a quick little overview of everything about Kindbody 2, and then Ellen will join us to talk about everything on the legal side and how she partners with us and all of our couples and parents to navigate their family building journeys, no matter what they look like. So thank you, everyone. Gosha, Dr. Skaznik Wikiel, please take it over from here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We wanted to share some exciting, the new changes in the Colorado surrogacy law, as well as how to go through the entire process at Kindbody. So as we heard, Ellen Trackman is going to be joining me. So we have the full overview of surrogacy. So we want to welcome you to Kindbody. So Kindbody is we're opening brand new clinic and in Cherry Creek this winter. So we are going to be sending all, if you want to join us for the opening, you're welcome to. We're going to give you more information later. And we are a new generation of fertility clinics on a mission to make reproductive health and fertility care more accessible for all. So who is a gestational carrier or surrogate? So this is a woman who carries and delivers a child for a couple or an individual, and those are called either intended parent or intended parents. And that person does not have any genetic connection to the child. So what are the medical reasons somebody may use a gestational carrier? So it could be a medical condition that precludes carrying a pregnancy or could result in harm to the pregnant person or fetus. So it could include any age-related or psychological factors also. It could be unidentified endometrial factors, such as recurrent implantation failure. So for example, somebody goes through IVF and does several cycles, and every time they do embryo transfer, it fails. And there is no really other reason that would explain it. Also, it could be scar tissue in the uterus. And finally, a single male or a male couple may need gestational carrier to achieve pregnancy. So what are our criteria at Kindbody for somebody who wants to be intended parent? So we usually recommend that the youngest member of a couple should be under 56 years old. And we would consider on a case-by-case basis for couples where the older member is between 56 and 59. And over age 60 or older, they cannot proceed with this process. The main reason for this is because we want to, the parent to be around for the child when the child is born, and at least for the majority of their life. So initially, when intended parents present, they would require screening. And for the female partner, the initial screening would involve doing ovarian reserve testing with AMH and usually also ultrasound. We would check blood type, blood count, do infectious disease screening. We also recommend genetic carrier screening to exclude any autosomal recessive disorders. We also require recent pap smear and mammogram if a woman is 40 years of age or older. And finally, we also do Food and Drug Administration recommended physical exam, donor risk factor questionnaire, and medical and genetic history form, just to go over any medical factors. And then for male partner, the initial screening includes semen analysis, where we want to make sure that there is sufficient amount of sperm needed for the in vitro fertilization process. We also do infectious disease screening, genetic carrier screening, FDA physical exam, again, donor risk factor questionnaire, and medical and genetic history form that the male partner fills out. So for the couple preparation, we always require third-party counseling, and I'm going to talk about it more on the next slide. Also, there is always the couple requires legal clearance and legal contract between the intended parents and the potential gestational carrier. And Ellen is gonna talk about it more.
Best part, very exciting. Get excited.
Very exciting. And then we require financial clearance and also signing any consents that are involved in the process. So it can be IVF consent, it can be pre-implantation genetic testing consent if the couple chooses to do genetic testing on the embryos, frozen embryo transfer consents, and use of gestational carrier consent. And then gestational carrier comes in for screening and testing, and once the gestational carrier is clear to proceed and her checklist is complete, then the cycle is coordinator. And then so medications are ordered, and the entire timeline for the entire process is given to the couple and the gestational carrier. So I frequently get lots of questions regarding why do we require third-party counseling session? So using a gestational carrier can be, couples usually have many questions and concerns about the future. How are they going to talk to their child in the future? How are they going to explain to others why they weren't using, why they didn't conceive on their own, but rather had to use gestational carrier? Or in general, they had not thought about going into the process much, and they just want to know more. So at Kindbody, we require that all patients using any type of donor, so either egg donor, sperm donor, or a gestational carrier, which is like uterus donor in a sense, speak with a therapist to make sure that they're comfortable with their choice. And then so the questions that we usually encourage them to ask and are discussed at those sessions are, what are you going to tell your child? What are you going to tell other people? How do you handle resemblance talk? And then also it's another very important issue is to discuss anonymity, right? So with right now, many people do 23andMe or Ancestry.com, and then the discussion kind of goes where like, is this anonymous? And especially if somebody's using the donor, not so much when somebody's doing gestational carrier, but that can be if somebody is using a donor, that can be actually sometimes couples require to conceive sperm donor or egg donor and then using gestational carrier. So in this circumstance that's very important to know about those issues. So, and then finally, once everybody gets to cycle and everything is coordinated, the couple comes in for another FDA screening appointment that includes questionnaire, physical exam, and labs, including infectious diseases screening again. And this is usually scheduled for the intended mother on stimulation day 1 of their IVF cycle. And then it's usually the baseline ultrasound and FDA screening appointment is scheduled together. And we also encourage the intended father to undergo sperm cryopreservation just in case. And then FDA screening appointment, which includes, again, questionnaire, physical exam, and labs, is done within 7 days of that sperm collection. So who can be a gestational carrier? That's also a question that comes up a lot, because patients will present and they say, oh, I have a friend who wants to be a gestational carrier for me. So who can be a gestational carrier? So the qualifications, there's lots of different things that need to be kind of met for a person to become a gestational carrier. So generally, those are between ages 21 and 40, with embryo transfer occurring before the age of 40. And special considerations may be given if a carrier is a friend or family member, and then they're under age of 45. We recommend that they're between their body mass index is between 18.5 and 32. And then again, special consideration can be made if the carrier is a friend or family member and has a body mass index of less than 35. We also require no more than 5 deliveries, because then risk of complications goes up, like postpartum bleeding, for example, and also no more than 2 cesarean sections, because then the risk of complications is higher. And we also require that the gestational surrogate has given birth to at least 1 child of their own that is being raised by them. So then the gestational carrier must be postpartum, so after delivery, for more than 9 months from a vaginal delivery and at least 1 year from a cesarean section. And then we require mammogram, up-to-date mammogram for gestational carriers over age 40, and no history of chronic illness, no chronic history of psychiatric disorders, including substance abuse, major depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and must not have undergone gastric bypass surgery or lap band surgery. There is no history of chronic tobacco use within the last 5 years, or no marijuana use within the last 30 days, and no history of chronic intake of more than 5 alcoholic beverages a week. And then the gestational carriers, potential gestational carriers, they should also be residing in a stable family environment, devoid of any emotional or physical abuse or threat of violence or manipulation. And they should have adequate support from their partner, and just there should be no significant emotional and tangibles. And I mean, they have to, if they have no partners, that doesn't preclude, they don't have to have a partner, but if they don't, they should also have support from their family and friends. And then we also do not allow for daughters to be carriers for mothers, because there are other issues going into it, as you can imagine. And then also gestational carriers cannot be employees of the intended parents. And another kind of not very good situation here. And then, or employees of Kindbody. And we at Kindbody we do not participate in traditional surrogacy. So what traditional surrogacy is where eggs and uterus originate from the same person. So we require to have for the eggs to be from a different person, uterus to be from a different person, and sperm to be from a different person. And then so at the initial consult, we asked the gestational carrier to sign consents and also undergo history and physical exam. And we do not provide legal agreements at Kindbody. That's why it's important to see somebody like Ellen to have this legal agreement in place before anything happens. And then, so the gestational carrier also needs to undergo sonohysterogram, which is a test done under ultrasound, where we put a little bit of saline into the uterus and to make sure that there is no polyps, fibroids, or scar tissue that would have to be potentially removed before embryo transfer happens. And we also do a mock transfer, which is pretty much looking if the catheter for the transfer can be easily passed to the uterus. And then the potential gestational carrier undergoes blood work, which includes checking thyroid, blood and screen, infectious disease testing, also urine drug screen. We require recent pap smear, mammogram if over age 40, and we also require screening for sexually intimate male partner for infectious diseases. And again, third-party counseling session. And those are actually frequently done separately and also with intended parents, gestational carrier, and gestational carrier's partner being present. And so it can happen that the gestational carrier is not going to be cleared either medically or psychologically or for any other reason. Then we would inform the intended parents that they must choose another carrier. And then again, to emphasize, legal contract, super important. And then that has to be finalized before cycle starts. And then, so we then review the protocol dates with the gestational carrier and intended parents. And we repeat infectious diseases screening within 30 days of transfer for the gestational carrier. And gestational carrier follows the protocol with the medications that prepare their endometrial lining for implantation. And pregnancy test is usually done 9 to 10 days after blastocyst transfer, which is usually embryo between day 5 or day 6. So I will be happy to take any questions if there are any questions at this point.
Doctor, there was a good question for you that came up, which was, what if a GC's had a miscarriage? If a potential gestational carrier's had a miscarriage before, does that disqualify her?
No, absolutely not. So miscarriages are fairly common in general. Actually, about 30% of pregnancies end in miscarriage. So just having one miscarriage and otherwise having a child, the only thing is that they have to have at least one living child, right? So if they just had miscarriage once or even twice, that does not preclude them from carrying pregnancy.
Awesome. Thank you. There was a question from someone looking to carry for her brother and his husband and what the process was. So hopefully overall this is answering that, but that is one of the pre-qualifiers, is that you have to have already had one of your own children to be a surrogate for someone else.
Yep. Yeah, definitely.
So we go to legal and then we can come back to medical as well if questions come up.
I don't know if you want to share the screen on your end?
So I think the slides are with you. So I don't
Yeah,
know.
Gosha, they're right underneath. So if you want to go back to sharing your screen and just do the next slide, we added them to the bottom.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Be my slide master. I appreciate it.
I will be your slide master. There you go. There you go.
Oh, very nice. Okay. Thank you so much. And I feel like we didn't get a full introduction of you. So I do want to like toot your horn for a little bit. I'm really excited about Kindbody coming to Colorado. So as an attorney, I have my own practice and I have the honor of working with most of the clinics in Colorado. We're so lucky here to have so many good clinics, but Kindbody has really established themselves as, you know, basically a spa like, you know, beautiful facility that people love going to. So I think they've really established a good reputation. And I was really excited to see Dr. Skosnick-Wickiel go to Kindbody and get to work with her in that capacity. She didn't mention that she like did her postdoc at Harvard, that she's totally brilliant. So I'll just throw it out there that if you get a chance to work with her in the future, I would say I would count yourself lucky because she is a brilliant doctor and a lovely person. Okay, so now we'll talk about legal. So anytime you're looking at a surrogacy arrangement, either as the surrogate or the intended parents, you have to go through the legal process. And in Colorado, we passed a new law. So it was signed by Governor Polis on May 6, 2021. And that was the day it became effective. So the law was immediately effective and applying to all gestational surrogacy arrangements. And it talks very specifically about what is required of both intended parents and surrogates and provides protections to them as well as children born by surrogacy. Okay, I'll do my disclaimers. We'll go next slide. So I like to do disclaimers that there's no attorney-client relationship formed by attending this. So obviously, if you're telling me all your deep, dark secrets in the comment box, I can't have that usual attorney-client privilege about it. But I definitely encourage, you know, consults. You can always go through Trackman Law Center and schedule a consult to talk more about what we're talking about here. I am licensed to practice law here in Colorado, as well as in California, New Mexico, and Montana. And I have a law partner who's also licensed in New York and New Jersey. And if you're ever dealing with legal issues in other states, our community of lawyers in the area are pretty small. So I can generally, you know, I generally have a good referral or suggestions for other attorneys in those states as well. But this is a very state by state practice of law, where the law in your state about surrogacy really affects how surrogacy can be done there. So for example, most people know that in Michigan, compensating surrogacy is not permitted. In fact, it's criminalized. So, you know, we definitely say like stay far away from Michigan, although there is definite hope that they change the law. And so Michigan hopefully will not be ostracized in the future. But for now, surrogacy is a no-go in Michigan. But hopefully one of the things to take out of this is to always engage an attorney, talk with an attorney who specializes in this area if you're thinking about surrogacy. Okay, so a quick roadmap. There is a question. Let's see if I can read the questions and talk. What if I'm a surrogate in Colorado and then move to Texas where I give birth? Do rules, regulations change? That actually is an excellent question. So the jurisdiction where you give birth generally is the jurisdiction that should apply, because that where a child is born is where the birth certificate will be issued and where they're looking at that determination of parental rights for the birth certificate. So there's always like nuances and exceptions to every rule, but generally your surrogacy agreement will be under the state law where you give birth. So where the gestational carrier is giving birth. Okay, and we can come back more to that if that didn't totally answer it. So as a roadmap, we're going to talk about the purpose of the law, some general information about it, surrogate requirements. So remember, there's layers of requirements. The clinic has their own requirements and the law has requirements, and they pretty much match up, but there are a few slight differences that are worth knowing. And you need to meet both. You have to meet the legal ones and the clinic ones to be a surrogate with Kindbody, for example. Intended parent requirements, and the whole list. We'll go through it. Sorry, we'll get to it. Termination requirements, parentage orders. Okay, let's go into it. We don't need to do the list. Next slide. Okay, so the purpose of the law was to establish consistent standards and procedural safeguards to protect everyone in the surrogacy in surrogacy agreements and arrangements, and to recognize the technological advances in assisted reproductive medicine and allow them to be used according to public policy. In other words, surrogacy was going pretty well before the law, but they wanted to be sure that there were protections within the law, just in case there was a judge who didn't agree, who had their own viewpoints. If people weren't following kind of the best practices, which occasionally happened, this kind of puts into law regulations that make sure that everyone's doing it in a way that protects intended parents, protects surrogates, protects the baby being born. Next slide. Okay. So I mentioned it was effective May 6, 2021. Our surrogate statute is interesting that applies both to gestational surrogacy, which is what Kindbody does, where the surrogate is genetically unrelated to the child she's carrying. But the law also does apply to genetic, or it's also called traditional surrogacy, equally. So if you were to go through a traditional surrogacy where it's through like an IUI and essentially the surrogate is also the donor, the law would apply in the same way to that type of surrogacy arrangement. Although I will note that those are very, very small portion of the surrogacy is done still, and most surrogacy we see is gestational, where the surrogate's not related to the child. The gestational surrogate, the surrogacy law in Colorado does not apply to other forms of assisted reproductive technology. So any requirement in here that we're talking about for surrogacy doesn't apply necessarily to egg donation or sperm donation or other forms of assisted reproductive technology. Next. Okay, surrogate eligibility requirements. So this should sound pretty familiar because it's pretty close to what Kindbody has. So Kindbody had from 21 to 40, with some exceptions a little older. So the law just says you have to be over 21. The law also says you have to give birth to at least one child. So same as Kindbody. You have to complete a medical evaluation related to the surrogacy arrangement by a licensed medical doctor, which is exactly what Kindbody would do with you. You have to complete a mental health consultation by a licensed mental health professional, again, part of their system. So very consistent with the law. And have independent legal representation of your choice by an attorney licensed in Colorado throughout the surrogacy arrangement, which again is what they would recommend. And definitely the best part, spending time with your attorney, thinking of all the worst case scenarios in a contract. Okay, maybe not that full part, but you need representation. Next section, next slide. Intended parent eligibility, pretty basic. They have to be at least 21. They have to go through a medical evaluation, also need legal representation. The thing that's really worth noting with the law that isn't always consistent with other states is that our law is tried very hard to be non-discriminatory. So intended parents under Colorado surrogacy law can be a single parent, they can be a same-sex couple. They do not have to be genetically related to the child, meaning that a single intended parent or a couple could receive donor egg and donor sperm, or they could receive a donated embryo and still use a surrogate and have parental rights, even though they weren't genetically related to the child that they intend to parent. So that's important to note, and we don't see that in every state. Okay. When can the law apply? So this is kind of goes to the question of like, what if I'm here in one state, or I'm moving to Texas, or I'm an intended parent, but I'm working with someone in another state. And this is where the laws get a little bit complicated. So the Colorado law says it can apply as long as at least one party is a resident of Colorado. So if the intended parent is here, or the surrogate's here, or if the birth will occur here. So it could be that no one lives here, but gestational carrier is moving here, and then Colorado law would apply. Or if the assisted reproduction is performed here pursuant to the surrogacy agreement. So if you went to Kindbody Denver, but no one lived in state, it could still apply to your surrogacy arrangement. But there is, again, a complex nuance of if you're planning on giving birth somewhere else, it might still make sense to have like a parentage order under that state's law. Okay, next slide. So the law does provide certain protections. So I wanted to give an example of one of them. One of those protections is the termination of the surrogacy agreement, meaning if you enter into an agreement as a surrogate to carry for some intended parents, but your life situation changes before a transfer, like you lose your job, your child has medical issues, something significant happens. I mean, even if they don't, you still have the right to terminate that agreement and say like, I want to do this for you, but it's not the right time. I need to back out of this arrangement. And the law specifically says that you as a surrogate have the right to back out without being subject to penalties. And same way, the same from the other side, intended parents have the right to terminate the agreement without being subject to any penalties too. So just to be clear that everyone has full rights going into this and can leave as well until you're pregnant. If you're pregnant, that no longer applies because you're carrying the child for someone else. Okay, next slide. Parentage orders. So in any surrogacy arrangement, there's at least 2 legal parts. So one of them is that contract that you enter where you sort out, is there compensation? Is there reimbursements? What does that look like? How many embryos can be transferred, which the gold standard is now only 1, but occasionally there's times when they look at 2. And I don't know, actually it's a good question while we're on it. Doctor, do you guys ever transfer more than 1 embryo to a surrogate? We'll come back to it. It's okay. I was curious, but we'll see about Kindbody's policy on that. So questions like that, as well as sorting out what if something worst case scenarios, what if you're on bed rest for extended periods of time? What if something's wrong with the pregnancy? How is that being dealt with? So all that's in the contract. The second legal part happens after the transfer and a successful pregnancy has been established. So that's when you do a parentage order. The law presumes, generally like in any state, the law tends to presume that someone who is pregnant is the parent of that child and that their spouse is also a parent of that child. So we have to overcome those presumptions so we can let the world and the hospital and the birth certificate and vital records know that actually in this case, the person giving birth is not the legal parent of the child, and instead it's the intended parents. So we do that by what we call PBO, or pre-birth parentage order, where we prepare legal documents, send it to the court, and they confirm through a legal order who the legal parents are, and that the surrogate has no legal rights or responsibilities to that child. Next slide. Okay, so some of the big takeaways for the Colorado law. So I think that the big one that is different from other states is that idea that you don't have to be genetically related to the child, because that is fairly unique to Colorado, as well as the idea that traditional surrogacy or genetic surrogacy receives the same protections as a gestational surrogacy arrangement. The other big thing is protection for single parents and LGBTQ plus parents, as well as married opposite sex couples as well. So it's really nice that we have these greater protections for parents, surrogates, and children, as well as noting that there are specific requirements that always have to be met in terms of what's in the contract, having the mental health consultation, having the medical evaluations, and that legal representation. So those are big takeaways, but the number one takeaway is to talk to an attorney, and most of us are actually nice as attorneys go, right? And give consultations. They're always happy to kind of talk about your situation and how we can help you. I like the single transfer explanation, going back to the comments. Amanda, Lynn, do you want to lead kind of going through these comments, questions?
Yeah, we got a lot of good questions. You guys did a good job, because a lot of the questions that were being asked here, and Gosha, if you just want to click stop share, and then we can see you guys as you, the little red button down.
Do you want me to take the what is the difference one? I can do that one.
Yeah, let's start there. What I was saying is you guys did a
now.
great job because you guys answered most of the questions that were asked here, but let's start with that one from Lauren. What's the difference between a surrogate and a gestational carrier, or is it just semantics?
Yeah, great question. And I will say, it's like, economics professor or lawyer, like you can get different answers on that from different people. I would say surrogate is the shorthand for either gestational carrier or traditional surrogate. And I would say it's like a less clear term, but we tend to use it just because it's faster and more well-known, like surrogate, someone caring for someone else, while gestational carrier is like more specific, like clearly this is someone who's carrying as a surrogate, but not genetically related to the child, versus genetic surrogate or genetic carrier, that she is genetically related to the child she's caring for someone else. But I mean, because surrogates become so common, I mean, it frequently refers to gestational carrier as well. So just kind of a shorthand for either, but a little bit vaguer.
I think that makes sense. Lauren, if it doesn't, ping again. Here is one. Is it always necessary to go through an attorney? This one was sent directly to me. So is it always necessary to go through an attorney? What if I want to help my sister and her partner by giving them my sperm? I don't feel the need to get a lawyer involved. Is it 110% necessary? So this isn't really one about surrogacy, but more about like sperm donation, which we do have a big event happening next week about egg, sperm, and embryo donation. I'll share the details there, but this, we can still tackle it
Am I
tonight.
allowed to answer or just leave the cliffhanger that you have to come to the next one to learn the answer to that? No, I'll give you the shorthand, but definitely come to the next one we're doing, where we do talk about sperm donation arrangements, both medical and legal, and can go into more details about that. So with surrogacy, there is a specific statute that requires legal representation from both sides. We don't have that same legal requirement in Colorado for sperm or egg donation. We do have a statute that requires that a licensed medical license, so it's a licensed physician or advanced practice nurse must supervise the conception with the donated sperm. So there is a medical requirement, but I mean, a strong recommendation for legal, and many clinics won't work with you until you have that legal agreement in place because it is so important.
Makes sense. You kind of touched on, I'm scrolling through, I'm looking at all of them. How do
Well,
I
I
become
do see
a
one
surrogate
at the
for my
bottom.
brother? Yeah, go ahead, jump in.
Oh,
please.
sorry. And I don't think I had the same one you were mentioning, but this one, can you clarify embryo status? You would not transfer a donor embryo to GC, correct? One of the IPs must be genetically related to the embryo, yes. And that is no, that's actually not the case. The intended parents do not have to be genetically related to the embryo. The Colorado law that passed on May 6, 2021 made it very clear that you could use donor egg, donor sperm, or a donated embryo and still receive recognition as intended parents to be parents of that child without the genetic connection.
Great. I got one of these privately, and then another one came in. I haven't fully read it, but can you touch on surrogacy and mental health? And this is probably one for both of you. Like, what does the screening process look like?
So we generally go through any medical and psychological history, and there are conditions that I mentioned before, like schizophrenia or substance abuse that would preclude someone to be a gestational carrier, right? And the process that we require with third-party counseling, it's mostly for the intended parents and the carrier to find out more about like the entire process from the psychological standpoint, and how to talk to the child in the future and so on. But potentially, if there are any hidden prior psychological problems that could also be detected during that screening.
And I will say the law calls it a consultation, although I think most clinics require some kind of screening process too. And my understanding from, mental health is such a big part of this, to make sure everyone's understanding the mental health ramifications. But my understanding is also a big part of education, to making sure intended parents understand all of those mental health issues, that a surrogate understands, because there is a lot going into that, to carry a child for someone else. And we like to refer to it as like extreme babysitting, that like you're, because I sometimes be like, how could you give away your child? Like, a teacher loves your child, but they give them back at the end of the day. But there is a lot emotionally, mentally going on with that kind of understanding and that commitment to someone else.
Great, thanks. Can I have a surrogate from another country, or do they have to be a US citizen? I'm interested in using a friend as a surrogate who lives in Colombia.
So the law where you give birth is very important, as well if someone's living in that another country, whether they could be subject to criminal penalties or other serious risks about whether you'd be recognized as a legal parent. But in terms of whether those statuses of when in Colorado law can apply. So like if they're living here, if they were giving birth here, if the procedure happened here, and the Colorado law could apply. And our law does not require a surrogate or the intended parents to be US citizens or have any certain immigration status. So that is not a requirement. But always worth checking in if there's other living in other countries or other laws that could apply, that could create other elements of risk or concern.
Great. this is for you. Hold on, sorry. Oh, this is for the RI. What if I want to use a surrogate because I don't want to go through a pregnancy, but my body is capable of it? Can a surrogate be utilized even if it's for non-medical reasons?
Yes, yes, it can be. Just, that not everybody feels like they want to carry pregnancy. So, and that's their choice. So definitely they can use a gestational carrier if the only reason is that they just don't want to be pregnant.
Yeah. And when setting up an agreement with a surrogate, Ellen, do you help your clients figure out what the communication process looks like between the intended parent and the surrogate? Like, are they usually fine with texting and such, or is it really a strict business only sort of communication?
Yeah, no, and I would say, so there's often there's other third parties here. So I feel like, the REI and the lawyer, we're big elements and we're important parts. Many people go through agencies. So I'll note, I co-own Colorado Surrogacy that does matching and support. And they do a lot when they're doing matching. So many questions go into that matching process. Is this something that you want to be really involved in each other's lives, that you want to be at appointments, you want to be texting at 2 a.m., or is this more like an arm's length thing? I want to help you, but I really value my space and my privacy, and making sure everyone's on the same page on that kind of relationship and communication level. So I feel like an agency, when they're matching, especially, does a lot of that, but we certainly get some of that in the legal contract too, when there's those kind of expectations.
Great. And does the same go for attending doctor's appointments?
Yes, absolutely. So that tends to be part of it. I would say most arrangements, intended parents, the contracts often say intended parents have the right to be in an appointment, but it's certainly something that if a surrogate was I'm not comfortable with that, or I have modesty requirements, that can be included in the contract, and, always drawing barriers and lines that, make sense for each of them in a comfort level.
Great. And then lastly, let's talk about pricing. There's pricing on two fronts here, the price of the surrogate and then also the price of the procedure. So how much is a surrogate? Does it depend on the surrogate herself, or does an agency usually set the price? What does pricing differ for people who are using a surrogate at Kindbody versus people who are, using IVF to conceive for their own biological child?
There's a lot of elements. Do you want to take the medical side of the medical costs, and I'll take the surrogate compensation side?
Oh, yeah, right, because these are totally different. And there is definitely a way higher price for using a surrogate, and for the entire pregnancy, right? Because they are carrying the pregnancy for someone, so they need to be compensated. All their medical bills are also covered by intended parents. So the costs that are involved in the initial process with the IVF process, what we do they include the cost of IVF, cost of embryo transfer, and then if genetic testing is done on the embryos, that is additional cost. It is very hard to give the bulk part, how much it costs in total. It's hard. It's definitely way more expensive, the entire process, than just doing in vitro fertilization without using gestational carrier.
Yeah, and I'll say from the other side, from the non-direct medical part, it tends to be much more expensive if you need a surrogate, unfortunately. So there's a lot of elements that go into that. If you're an intended parent and you have someone in your life that's, a cousin or a friend who meets all these qualifications, and they want to do what we call altruistically or compassionately, where they're not receiving compensation, that can be amazing and certainly make it much more affordable. most people aren't so lucky and they do need to turn to agencies, or they want to provide compensation to the surrogate for what she's going through. And so in those cases, most surrogates, so most agencies that do matching, they charge a fee to do the matching and support. And then surrogates who are being compensated through an agency are compensated, and different agencies charge different amounts. So just like to give a one pinpoint number, like Colorado Surrogacy here, the surrogates for a first-time surrogates compensated base of $45,000 to be a surrogate for someone else. So that's a cost that intended parents cover, but the surrogate receives for going through this pregnancy, and it's throughout the pregnancy they're receiving, part of it divided throughout the pregnancy. And then there's other fees as well, like through an embryo transfer. If she can't work, there's often lost wages that are being compensated to make her whole for that time out of work. So.
I was also going to add on the medical side, like, for example, if they have pregnancy complications and end up in the hospital, then the intended parents are responsible for all the medical bills. So that obviously is going to add up to the entire. So it's very hard. It's definitely very expensive. And it's really even hard to predict sometimes what the final cost is going to be.
And insurance is a huge one, which could be, 10 webinars on its own about whether the surrogate's own insurance will cover the maternity and delivery costs, or if the intended parents need to help her find another policy, which they would be responsible for the surrogacy.
That makes sense. There were so many great questions. This is obviously a topic people are still a little bit hesitant to talk about publicly, just based on the number of questions I got to me directly. So everyone, please, we at Kindbody, we are happy to help you on your journey. Not only can we connect you with our wonderful doctors, no matter where you are, but also with wonderful people like Ellen and the Trackman Law Center. We also can help connect you with our mental health professionals and everyone who can kind of walk you through this process. We can be your partner in that. So please, please reach out to us. Please let us help you build your family. That's what we're here to do. And that's what we want to do. Lastly, we have a wonderful event happening next week. It's parallel, similar to this one, about egg, sperm, and embryo donation. These two rock stars will be joining us again. So come back, come with more questions. We hope to see you there. And anything else, you'll get an email tomorrow with all the information that happened tonight and contact information for our guest, Ellen, tonight. So if you do have any other questions, she'll help you there. And we look forward to seeing you guys and working with everyone to build their family soon. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.